morning. It's
Yes.
Linda Therapist, and I want to thank you for being with us today on another If You Don't Mind. I have a special guest with me today, and that's Jacqueline Francois. And she works in the school system, and she's very powerful when she talks about helping children. And we both have on green today because we are closing out Mental Health Awareness Month. And it should be every month that mental health awareness is not taken lightly, but it should be like brushing your teeth in the morning. How do I feel today? Check in on that mental health. So, without further delay, I want to welcome Jacqueline. Can I call you Jackie this morning?
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
want to welcome my friend Jackie. We're also in the Brown Sugar Clinicians together, where there are a lot of school psychologists and things of that nature. So we get to talk about this on a regular basis. And it's so important. We're speaking to the parents this morning, we're speaking to college age kids, we're speaking to the teens out there. So, help us get this message across. So, Jackie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And as you stated, we're closing out Mental Health Awareness Month. I'm so grateful for this month. And as you stated, Lynn, it is actually a very important month. We should actually celebrate it 365 days out the year because our mental health is just like our physical health. It is very important. And without it, we really, could have problems and issues that would cause our daily life to be limited. So I'm so grateful for this month. And hopefully, therapists like yourself and like myself, we can continue our mental health awareness 365 days throughout the year. So I'm just happy to be here today.
Yes, and I thank you, and I want to commend you. Another school year done.
Yes.
Every year, there are more and more challenges. Our kids face a lot. There are trends in mental health with children. First of all, now they have to have school shooter drills. So that can place some fear in children. Then there's a lot of peer pressure, as well as, the social media. So, that can cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of behavioral
Mhm.
disorders such as ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, and suicide ideations and attempts. Alarmingly, suicide is now the second leading cause of death among adolescents in many countries, and that's including the US. There
Mhm.
has been a notable increase in ER visits for suicide attempts. So, Jackie, what does mental health look like with our school age kids? Because you get to see it on a daily basis.
Lynn, and thank you for that question because it really does vary. And I'm going to say this mental health in school age students, especially those middle and high school students, and not to say it doesn't happen in elementary, but it can look very different depending on the individual. But there are definitely some common patterns that we observe on a daily basis. At this age, our students are going through major developmental changes, i.e., puberty. They are forming their own identities, managing academic pressures, and trying to navigate the social dynamics that include social media, and often just dealing with growing influences of that social media community that sometimes they just don't fit in. All of this can impact their mental well being. And some of the signs of positive mental health, it includes being able to form healthy relationships and show emotional resilience, because that's very important. And then they learn to cope with stress and maintain interest in school and extracurricular activities. But on the flip side of this, Lynn, mental health struggles might show up as changes in their behaviors, like withdrawing from their friends and families and declining grades, because we see that. Even
Mhm.
those frequent absences, the district that I work in, the focus right now is truancy, making sure that we
Yeah.
focus on our truant students. And then also irritability and mood swings, and even physical complaints like headaches and stomach aches without a clear medical cause. So for some, it may also involve, like you stated earlier, anxiety, depression, self harm, and even substance use. So what's important is recognizing that mental health, it isn't just about that mental illness, but it's about how our students think and how they feel and they function on a daily basis. So I just think it's so important that we create safe and supportive environments in schools where the students can feel safe, seen and heard, and supported. Most importantly, that's essential for becoming healthy with their mental health.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because as kids grow, they want to feel safe. They
Yes.
want to feel seen and they want to feel heard.
Yes.
And who has that responsibility? The parents as well as the teachers. The
Yes.
teachers, if you really think about what that word teacher encompasses, the teacher is the nurturer, the teacher is the disciplinarian, the teacher is the teacher. Think about all of that. And that is very, very important. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I also wanted to know why some of the rates were increasing in the trends in mental health. And as we look at it, there's a lot of academic pressure out there now.
Yes.
A lot of academic pressure, increased expectations, standardized tests, and things of that nature. Social media and screen time, that is a culprit. And their idealized images, cyberbullying, it disrupts their sleep pattern, because a lot of my teens now, they're not going to say, I'm tired today. Well, why are you tired? Well, I didn't go to bed till 3 a.m. Well, what were
Right.
you doing? Well, I was on Snapchat or I was on TikTok or whatever. And so parents need to really look at that. And then I've noticed that after the pandemic, that has been hard. There's been isolation, loss. It disrupted their normal routine.
Mhm.
It was hard because kids need that socialization. So
Yeah.
they did not get that during the pandemic. And then that had the increased family stress. It could have been a domestic violence situation that they were induced in every day. And
Mhm.
there was reduced access to care. There's so much care in the schools, so there was reduced access. And Jackie, what resources can be used to support students out there? What resources are out there?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So, when it comes to supporting our students with those mental health challenges, there are a wide variety, especially in your school settings, but then also out in the community. But let's talk about the in school support. So, you mentioned it briefly. You talked about those teachers, but outside of those teachers, we have school counselors. We have school psychologists, and even on some of the campuses, there are there's school social workers, there's safe coordinators. We have a gamut of mental health professionals that have been placed into the school settings. And these professionals are trained to help our students navigate the emotional and academic stress. And they can often identify when a student may need a little bit more of an intensive support that may include something like an assessment, so that we can ensure that that student is not actually in a mental health crisis. And
Mhm.
many of our schools also offer the mental health education. I do know that here in the district that I currently work in, that they do offer different mental health lessons. And then they also have things like Resiliency Day. They have Red Ribbon Week. They provide different programs for our students, even and they attach clubs to those actual initiatives to ensure student wellness. And then they also give the opportunity for those students who we would deem to have a mental health status of being what we would say is a good status. They become ambassadors to help create a culture on those campuses where it's okay to talk about your feelings and ask for help. Some outside resources I love to talk about,
Uh-huh.
because a lot of times, I feel like when there's you have to know that these resources exist, and a
Yeah.
lot of times our families, they just don't know, but there's so many community mental health clinics in your area. Now, I do know sometimes in the rural areas it's a little different, but in
Mhm.
our urban areas those mental health clinics are there. But also there are private therapists like Lynn, who's available to provide services and who can be a lifeline to our families. But there's also national helplines. What a
Yes.
national helpline that I give that number to even my own children is 988. It's a suicide and
Mhm.
crisis lifeline. It is 24 hours, 7 days a week. Students are able to use that number. Even my own students who have college buddies, I made sure everybody had that number. It's just important because we just never know, but we want to be sure that we equip our students with the necessary tools. And the other cool thing about it is even if they don't call, they can text. So they have a crisis text line also where students can text HOME, HOME, to 741 and it's free. So again, that was the crisis text line, and they would text HOME, HOME, to 741. Now, another resource that I think is really cool, and I use it for myself as well, is the Calm app. Sometimes our students have access to that. They can get it free. Our educators can get it free as well, a lot of times in different places. Also, Headspace and Mind Shift. Those are some great ones. And I will tell you, they can help you in real time with breathing exercises, helping you de-escalate in their own time. And I want to make sure that we don't forget this particular resource. I use this one a lot in the area that I'm in. It's NAMI. It's our National Alliance on Mental Illness. They offer workshops, Lynn, for our parents.
Yes, they do.
I mean, in the community, and they're free. And it's for our students and our parents. So I really do enjoy that particular organization. And the final one that I want to wrap up with, and I know I've probably given several.
No, this is perfect.
I want to wrap up with, thank you, with mental health first aid. So I'm also a facilitator, a trainer for mental health first aid. So in my community, I provide, even on the campuses that I work on as well, I provide youth mental health first aid. And with this program, it has been designed to train adults like family members, some of your viewers, and even the mentors and coaches who may be viewing, and community leaders, on how to recognize warning signs of mental health issues in young people. And then it teaches them how to identify potential triggers, offer initial support, and connect that student to the most appropriate professional that they may need at that time. So I think there's several resources out there. And if we need to, we can get something sent out to your viewers. But those are just a few that I would like to name.
That is wonderful. You know, our people perish for a lack of knowledge. So you have just given them all the resources. And what I'm going to do afterwards, I'm going to post them so people will understand or see them. You know, this is great, valuable information for parents as well as, you know, other individuals that may not have children, but these are some resources like NAMI. And that is very, very important. I wanted to just go over a few key statistics here for the mental health prevalence in Florida. Anxiety disorders, approximately 8.4% children aged 3 to 17 in Florida experience anxiety problems. And then depression, around 3.4% of children in the same age group report experiencing depression. Overall mental health conditions, a combined 19.9% of children aged 3 to 17 in the US have been diagnosed with ADHD, depression, or anxiety, or have behavior or conduct problems. Jackie, how do you deal with a parent that rejects the diagnosis? They don't want their child tagged with a mental health disorder. How do you, or should I say labeled, how do you deal with that in the school system?
Great question, Lynn. And I always like to start off with parents because obviously there's a need, but I always like to share with parents that the diagnosis, it's not a death sentence.
Yes.
It gives the opportunity for us actually to help put things in place for that student, whether if there's services or different supports. And just even, I'll give an example, if it's a student maybe with ADHD or a student with some type of label that impacts academic learning,
Yes.
it gives us an opportunity to put something in place for that student so it would make learning, yes, easier, but then we could provide accommodations to get that student to where they need to be academically so that they're still successful in their academics, and there's not a deficit there. So I always share with them, it's not a deficit. I mean, it's not a death sentence. So, give the student, and sometimes I know parents are thinking, I don't want my kid labeled, I
Hmm.
don't want that
Hmm.
stigma attached to them. But think about it. The longer we allow them to go without getting the service or the help that they need, the more deficits we create for our student. And sometimes the opportunities we have removed from them because we have decided that we don't want them to get the necessary help.
Yes, and that is so important. And I'm hoping that that does not fall on deaf ears. I'm hoping that parents realize it does not define your child,
Mhm.
but it will help by getting the services that they need so they can better do their academic studies and their academic work. One other thing I want to talk about briefly is ACE, which is adverse childhood experiences and potentially traumatic experience in childhood that they may be bringing into the school system that has had a profound physical and mental health effect on them. Do you see a lot of ACE, adverse childhood experiences?
Unfortunately, we do, Lynn, and I will share with you the district that I currently work in. We actually do have what's called trauma informed schools. So we want to be sure that we are supporting these schools and giving them the necessary them. When I say them, I mean the teachers, the cafeteria workers, the janitors, the administrators, the social workers, the school counselors. We want to equip them in the best way possible to ensure that they have the tools that are needed in order to support our students in such a way. The ACEs, with the adverse childhood experiences, a lot of times, people, they don't feel like just because you go home each day and you go home to maybe no food, or you go home
Yeah.
and there's no parent there, they don't think that that's going to impact a child academically, but also they don't feel like it will impact a child when it comes to their mental health. And unfortunately, it does. So that's why we do try to equip our staff to ensure that they know some of the signs, but also most importantly, that they're putting interventions and strategies in place to help those students become successful.
Thank you so much for that. And what the last thing before I want to touch on what can the parents do over the summer, can you briefly talk about the increase in autism spectrum disorder, nature, nurture? Where do you think that increase is coming from? And it's now noticeable. And a lot of it has been increased in the lower socioeconomic areas. And can you just speak on that briefly?
And it just actually kind of just what you were saying. Sometimes, especially in the rural areas, there's some different barriers there. Okay.
Yeah.
With our students, it really does depend sometimes geographically where you are. But I also think what, in reference to when you're talking about a child who may, or if a parent believe that they have autism, I think it's important as a parent, Lynn, first though, to trust your instincts,
Yes.
okay, and take action early. And I want to say this, it's important because I want to just, and just use yourself for the parents that are out there listening, or the mentors or the coaches or the leaders that are listening out there. When you go to your doctor and they tell you that you have, like, let's just say pre-hypertension or
Hmm.
pre-diabetes, we
Hmm.
want to be sure that we're taking the necessary steps so that the label or the diagnosis of hypertension is not completely labeled, or if it's labeled, that we're following the treatment plan so that we can have the best quality of life. So I think it's important for our parents to start talking to the pediatricians early on. Trust
Hmm.
your instinct. If you believe something's happening, share those specific behaviors and concerns that you may have noticed, whether it's a delayed speech or trouble with social interactions or maybe repetitive behaviors. Your doctor can refer you for developmental screening or even a full evaluation. And Lynn, it's also important to note that if you have a school age child, you can go to your district just to request an evaluation through your district as well. So that's important to know, that they can do that within their school. And it's also important as parents it would be helpful to keep a journal of what you're seeing, like I mentioned before, those patterns and those reactions and those behaviors, but also those milestones that you're believing that the student should have reached by now, because this can be very helpful during those evaluations. And we can't say it enough. Lynn has said it. I've said it. It doesn't define who your student is, and it's not a death sentence. But it's just important that we look at those things. If there are some actual, characteristics that have come up that we are seeing that we are just not sure about, be sure to follow up with your pediatrician, because we never know the important supports that can be placed early on, whether it's speech therapy, occupational therapy, or maybe even those special educational services. They can be implemented to ensure that your child gets the help that they need.
Jackie, that is such great information that you have been giving parents. I mean, this is great information. As we close today, I just want to give some information, and Jackie, I want you to jump in. What can parents do over the summer? And this is important because there are going to be cuts for the 25-26 school year. And I know you all are preparing for that as you're working, going towards what can parents do to prepare their children. For instance, you have somebody going to kindergarten. What can you prepare? They've never seen an A or a B. Now, what can these parents do mental health wise? And, you also said, look at their behavior, note down little things. If they're not talking, if they're doing certain things, note that down. That can be helpful to the teacher. But what can parents do over the summer, mental health wise, to prepare their children for the 25-26 school year?
And I'm so glad that you're asking that question. I like also, because you mentioned earlier about that whole screen time, but then I
Hmm.
heard you mention about, what about that kindergartner who's never been in school before
Hmm.
and who's coming for the first time? Routine is going to be important. You're
Yes.
going to need to establish a routine ahead of time, because I have to say this, that mental health thrives on predictability. And so you want to try easing those students into earlier bedtimes. Even over the summer, we can start that. Now, I know a lot of times when parents hear summer, they're like, wait a minute, it's time for these kids to just kind of enjoy life. But as we start to, because it's only an 8-week break, so as we start to wind back down and get ready for school, make sure that you establish a routine for your student. Be sure that those bedtimes are there, regular meals are there, and the screen time limits start to come into place. It's going to be very important that we do that, because we don't want to shock their systems when they first come back to school or when they're entering school for the first time. So we want to make sure that we establish a routine for these students. Also, I want to share this with you. Over the summer, especially if you know that there are students and families, and say, for example, if you have a student who has an existing diagnosis, you want to be sure that you are having conversations with those schools early. You want to connect with the school as early as possible. You want to partner with other families that are in your community. As we mentioned, there's NAMI out there, but there are workshops that can help you prepare for these things as well. You want to be sure that when Meet the Teacher comes up, when it's still during the summer, because Meet the Teachers is always a week before school or either 2 weeks before school begins, you want to make sure you take that effort to go in and meet that teacher, have an opportunity to see who your student will be with 7.5 hours out of the day, because that's how long they're normally in a school setting. So they're away from us. You also want to be sure that if your student is a student who already currently has an IEP or a 504, we want to be sure that that plan is up to date. And you want to be sure that as a parent, you have that information, that you equip yourself with it. But most importantly, if your student is age appropriate, you want to be sure that you give them the tools that they need. I always would share with my parents, keep that type of information in your notebook so the kids understand what accommodations that they are allowed to have, because what that does is it helps create that team approach, and the kids are able to advocate for themselves as well. But during the summer, those are just some things you can do to get ready. But other things you can do with your student is you can make sure that there are different programs in your community. Sometimes we do have the Boys and Girls Club. Because you want to give kids, especially if they have not been in a school setting, give them opportunities, the YMCA, to start to mingle with other students. But then you also want to be sure that sometimes, and I will share with you, there are different things on YouTube. You can help your child start to build a culture of mental wellness with looking at SEL, that's social and
Mhm.
emotional learning curriculums. That way, they have an opportunity to kind of start to get adjusted to some things. I just think that's very important. And then another thing in reference to, just getting ready for school, helping teach your kids during the summer coping strategies. And I tell you what, moms and dads and grandparents, aunts and uncles, and community leaders, if you're not sure how to teach your students coping strategies, you can always reach out to someone like Aylin, who's a licensed mental health counselor, or your licensed clinical social workers. Any of those therapists, you can reach out and get services started with your students so that they learn how to cope, and so that they're not immersed back into a culture where they're trying to figure out, how do I handle this? Because with those coping strategies, they learn things like deep breathing, they learn grounding techniques, they learn how to maybe journal when things just aren't, if they're not feeling well mentally. But just having some of those tools, it's going to get your student ready and teach them how to manage overwhelming moments that they may have during the day.
That is such good information. One thing, if you don't mind, can you just tell them what an IEP is? Because some parents might not know what an IEP is.
Yes, an IEP is an individualized education plan.
Mhm.
And with an IEP, typically, just giving an example, if you have a student who maybe has a specific learning disability, SLD, they're categorized like that. They, in their school district, again, you would have to go through that process, but they could be provided an individual educational plan to help that student along the way, whether it's with social and emotional, academic support, but they are provided accommodations to help those students get to where they need to be in order to be successful on your campuses.
Thank you so much for that psychoeducation as we talk about. We just want to educate you so you know. And another thing I want to add, if you don't mind, is that once their children go to school, they're used to a structured
Mhm.
setting. And structure can reduce some of the behavioral problems. So during the summer, maybe you can create some type of structure for your children. And that's going to help them also set tech boundaries. If they're on social media, set those boundaries. Maybe they're not going to do it. Maybe they have 2 hours a day.
Mhm.
Set those boundaries. Don't, worry about that. And watch for behavioral shifts.
Yes.
Behavioral shifts are changes in their mood, their sleep, their appetite, changes like that. That is very, very good to look at that. And also create a tech-free zone where, we're not going to do with tech today. And also talk about bullying. That's very
Mhm.
important. And not only bullying in school, cyber bullying on
Yes.
social media. That is very important. So set some social norms there at home and they will follow your children at school. I thank you so much for the education. You're a wealth of knowledge this morning. And I
Thank you.
thank you. And I know you're going to kick back and relax, and you deserve to enjoy your summer because it all starts again in August.
Yeah.
So, parents, if you're out there, loved ones, if you're out there, caregivers, if you're out there, make sure that you search for the help that you need. Don't wait until August when this child has issues that need to be and can be taken care of, and start that ball rolling during the summer because the teacher has more than one child in the class. So prepare yourself, prepare your child. If you don't mind, Jackie, I'd love to have you come back again in the fall when you return to school and maybe update our parents, loved ones, and caregivers on some more things that as changes are made, you know, going forward, what they can do. So I thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning time with us. And thank you. Enjoy your summer. I commend you on the job that you do. And I thank you what you do for children out there.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for being with us this morning. Jackie, would you like to have any closing words?
I just want to say to our parents, and I think in the community as well, I just think it's very important that we as educators, as caregivers, your role is pivotal. You have to remember that your role is pivotal. And just by recognizing any of these early signs,
Yes.
as Lynn stated, having that open dialogue and connecting our students with the most appropriate resources, we can help create environments where young people feel safe, they feel understood, and empowered to thrive. I always say each one reach one teaches one. And I just want to thank you for being here today. And I would love to come back in the fall to share.
Thank you so much. The three words we're going to close on, if you don't mind: safe, seen, and heard. Until next time, we'll see you later. Bye bye.